We all know the feeling. You're sitting at a dinner party, and the conversation takes a turn for the Wall Street. Suddenly, everyone's speaking a different language. Derivatives, collateralized debt obligations, credit default swaps. It's enough to make your head spin. You smile politely, but inside, you're desperately trying to remember what a hedge fund actually does. It's like stumbling into a secret society where everyone else seems to be in on the joke, except you. The truth is, the world of finance can feel like a giant magic show. But unlike a magic show, the stakes are incredibly high. Just like the emperor strutting around in his imaginary finery, the financial industry often relies on illusions and half-truths to maintain its aura of power and sophistication. Admati and Hellwig argue that much of what passes for financial wisdom is nothing more than smoke and mirrors designed to confuse and mislead the public. They expose the ways in which banks, regulators, and even economists have perpetuated a system that is both fragile and unfair. The authors argue that the financial industry has grown too large and too complex, creating a system that is both unstable and prone to crises. Admati and Hellwig don't mince words when describing the financial system's inherent fragility. They argue that banks, despite their buttoned-up exteriors and air of impenetrable seriousness, are essentially built on a foundation of sand, or perhaps more accurately, a mountain of debt precariously balanced on a thin sliver of actual capital. Think of it like this. Imagine a friend boasting about a magnificent new house they built. It's got everything. A swimming pool shaped like a dollar sign, a gold-plated doorknob, the works. But then you learn they only put down 5% of the actual cost. The rest, borrowed. Suddenly, their dream home feels more like a stiff breeze away from disaster. That's essentially what banks do, albeit on a much grander, more leveraged scale. Now let's sprinkle in some derivatives. Don't worry, we'll keep it light. Imagine a casino, but instead of just betting on red or black, you've got thousands of different bets. You can bet on the weather in Botswana, the price of yak milk futures, or whether your neighbor's dog will bark during the next episode of Game of Thrones. Derivatives are kinda like those bets, but with stocks, bonds, and other financial assets. They're contracts that derive their value from something else. Sounds complex? It is. And that's part of the problem. See, derivatives can be used for hedging, which is a fancy way of saying managing risk. So, banks take big risks, sometimes dressed up in fancy derivatives. And when those risks backfire, governments often feel compelled to bail them out. After all, who wants to see grandma's life savings disappear because some hotshot banker bet the farm on a subprime mortgage synthetic CDO squared? But here's the kicker. Knowing they'll be saved encourages even riskier behavior. It's like giving your teenager your credit card and promising to pay off the bill no matter what. You can guess how that ends. This, my friends, is the too big to fail dilemma, a comedy of moral hazard playing out on a global stage. Banks know they're too big to fail, so they take bigger risks. Governments, fearing the consequences of a meltdown, keep bailing them out. Admati and Hellwig aren't just here to point out the flaws in the system, they come bearing solutions. Their main suggestion for preventing future financial meltdowns? Make banks keep more of their own skin in the game. Think of it like this. Imagine you're playing poker with your buddies. One friend, let's call him Reckless Rick, keeps going all in on every hand, even when he has a 2 and a 7 offsuit. Now imagine Rick is playing with borrowed chips, and you know you'll be on the hook to cover his losses if he loses. Would you let him keep betting like a maniac? Probably not. You'd probably tell Rick to cool it, maybe even demand he put up some of his own money before continuing. That's essentially what Admati and Hellwig propose for banks. Remember those complex derivatives we talked about earlier? The ones that resemble a financial casino designed by mathematicians on a sugar rush? Admati and Hellwig have some thoughts on those too. And no, it doesn't involve banning them outright, though that's tempting. Instead, they argue for greater transparency and simplification. Let's break it down using a slightly less abstract example. Imagine you're buying a tuna sandwich. Sounds simple, right? But let's say instead of just tuna, mayo, and bread, there are 50 different ingredients listed, some with names you can't even pronounce. then imagine the price of the sandwich fluctuates wildly based on the price of tuna futures, the weather in the North Sea, and whether your neighbor's cat sneezed that morning. The too big to fail problem is a bit like a circus act gone wrong. We've got banks juggling chainsaws of risk, knowing that if they drop them, the government will swoop in with a safety net. Meanwhile, taxpayers are the clowns, holding their breath and hoping they don't get splattered with financial shrapnel. Admati and Hellwig argue that this whole circus act needs to end. They propose a multi-pronged approach to tackling the too big to fail issue, starting with breaking up banks that are deemed too big to fail. Admati and Hellwig's proposals aren't just about preventing future crises, they're about creating a fairer and more stable financial system for everyone. A system where banks are held accountable for their actions, where complexity doesn't equal a free pass for reckless behavior, and where taxpayers aren't left holding the bag when things inevitably go wrong. It's about moving away from a world where financial wizards get rich by pulling rabbits out of hats, and towards a world where the rules are clear, the risks are understood, and the clowns, that's us, the taxpayers, can finally relax and enjoy the show. Imagine a world-class orchestra, instruments tuned, musicians poised, ready to unleash a symphony of financial prosperity. Now picture a mischievous gremlin sneaking in, swapping out the sheet music with a chaotic cacophony of risky bets and regulatory loopholes. That's essentially what happens when we ignore the warnings of the banker's new clothes. Admati and Hellwig, our wise maestros in this scenario, provide a clear score for a more stable financial system. But what happens when we, the audience, allow the gremlins of short-term thinking and vested interests to drown out their melody? The music, my friends, can turn sour pretty quickly. Ignoring the advice in the banker's new clothes isn't just about abstract economic theory, it has real-world consequences. The 2008 financial crisis, a symphony of subprime mortgages, collateralized debt obligations, and credit default swaps, stands as a stark reminder of what can happen when we ignore the warnings. It was a financial farce of epic proportions, a play in which banks, regulators, and even economists all seem to have forgotten their lines. The script, however, was eerily familiar. Banks, flush with cheap credit and fueled by a belief that housing prices could only go up, engaged in a lending frenzy, doling out mortgages like candy to anyone with a pulse. These mortgages, often bundled and repackaged into complex securities, were then traded with reckless abandon, with no one bothering to check the creditworthiness of the borrowers. When the music stopped and the housing bubble burst, the fallout was catastrophic. Millions lost their homes, jobs, and life savings. One of the key takeaways from the banker's new clothes is the importance of vigilance. We can't simply rely on regulators to police the system. We need to be our own financial watchdogs, attuned to the subtle signs of excess and instability. Think of it like being a coal miner with a trusty canary. When the canary stops singing, you know something's wrong. Similarly, when we see certain patterns emerging in the financial world, excessive leverage, opaque financial instruments, a belief that this time it's different, it's time to start asking questions. So, what are some of these warning signs? One key indicator is the level of leverage in the system. When banks and other financial institutions are allowed to borrow excessively, it amplifies both profits and losses. Ignoring the advice in the banker's new clothes comes at a steep price. It's like attending a concert where the orchestra is playing out of tune, the conductor is drunk, and the audience is oblivious to the impending chaos. But unlike a concert, the consequences of a financial meltdown are far more severe than a ruined evening. By understanding the basic principles of sound finance, by demanding transparency and accountability from our financial institutions, and by being vigilant against the siren song of this time, it's different. We can help create a more stable and just financial system for everyone. It's time to tune our ears to the warnings, to demand better from our financial conductors, and to ensure that the music of prosperity plays on, in tune and for the benefit of all. Let's face it, the world of finance often feels like a foreign country where everyone speaks in a confusing dialect of acronyms and technical terms. It's enough to make even the most seasoned investor reach for a financial dictionary or a stiff drink. But as the Banker's New Clothes reminds us, understanding the fundamentals of finance isn't just for Wall Street hotshots. It's crucial for all of us. Think of it like this. You wouldn't attempt to navigate a foreign city without a map, a phrasebook, or at least a willingness to ask for directions. Similarly, navigating the complex world of finance requires a basic understanding of the language, the rules of the road, and the potential pitfalls. Now, we're not suggesting everyone needs to become a certified financial planner or memorize the Black-Scholes model. But having a basic understanding of concepts like risk, diversification, and compound interest can empower us to make more informed financial decisions. It's about asking questions, challenging assumptions, and not being afraid to admit when we don't understand something. It's about recognizing that financial literacy isn't a luxury. It's a necessity in today's complex world. For too long, individual investors have been treated like sheep in the financial markets, herded from one investment fad to another by slick salespeople peddling products they may not fully understand. The Banker's New Clothes encourages us to shed our woolly innocence and become more like shepherds of our financial futures. This means taking a proactive approach to managing our money, educating ourselves about different investment options, and not being afraid to ask tough questions of financial advisors. It's about understanding that while past performance is no guarantee of future results, a little bit of financial knowledge can go a long way. It's also about being wary of get-rich-quick schemes and investment products that seem too good to be true. Remember, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. As the saying goes, there's no such thing as a free lunch, especially in the financial markets. By becoming more informed investors, we not only increase our chances of financial success, but we also contribute to a more stable and efficient financial system. When investors are educated and engaged, it's harder for unscrupulous actors to pull the wool over our collective eyes. The Banker's New Clothes isn't just a call for individual action, it's also a plea for smarter regulation and a more responsible financial industry. Admati and Hellwig argue that policymakers need to go beyond simply patching up the holes in the system after each crisis. They need to address the underlying incentives that encourage excessive risk-taking and reward recklessness. Think of it like this. Imagine going to a tailor who keeps making you suits that are either too big or too small, with buttons that fall off at the slightest breeze. You wouldn't keep going back to that tailor, would you? You'd demand a refund, or at least a referral to someone who knew how to sew a straight seam. Similarly, we need to demand better from our financial tailors, the policymakers and regulators who are supposed to ensure the stability and integrity of our financial system. We need to push for regulations that promote transparency, accountability, and a level playing field. This means ending the too big to fail problem, closing regulatory loopholes that allow excessive risk-taking, and holding individuals accountable for financial misconduct. It's about creating a system where prudence is rewarded, recklessness is punished, and the suits actually fit. The lessons of the Banker's New Clothes are both timely and timeless. They remind us that the emperor of finance is often wearing nothing more than our collective willingness to believe in illusions. But by becoming more financially literate, by demanding better from our financial institutions, and by advocating for smarter regulation, we can help sew a stronger, more resilient financial fabric for ourselves and future generations. It's time to stop pretending the emperor is fully clothed and start asking the tough questions. It's time to hold our financial leaders accountable and demand a system that serves the needs of the many, not just the few. After all, in the grand tapestry of the global economy, we're all threads in this together. So, there you have it. Our whirlwind tour through the world of finance, guided by the witty wisdom of the Banker's New Clothes, has exposed the industry's often absurd underbelly. We've peeked behind the curtain, challenged the dogma, and learned that the emperors of finance, much like their fairy tale counterparts, are often parading around in their birthday suits. But here's the good news. Knowledge is power. By understanding the basic mechanics of finance, by questioning assumptions, and by demanding transparency, we become less susceptible to the illusions and manipulations that have plagued the industry for far too long. Remember those feelings of bewilderment at that hypothetical dinner party? The next time the conversation veers into the jargon-laden territory of derivatives and credit default swaps, you can confidently chime in, armed with the knowledge that a lot of it is just fancy packaging for relatively simple concepts, some of which might resemble a casino more than a bank. One of the greatest achievements of the banker's new clothes, and hopefully this essay, is making a potentially dry and intimidating subject both accessible and, dare we say, entertaining. We've used humor, analogies, and maybe a few too many circus metaphors to demystify the complex world of finance. Because here's the thing, understanding how money works shouldn't require a PhD in economics. It's about time we inject a healthy dose of humor and plain language into a realm that often takes itself far too seriously. After all, laughter is not only the best medicine, it's also a powerful tool for learning. When we can laugh at the absurdities of the financial system, when we can explain complex concepts using cats and tuna sandwiches, we're not just making things more fun, we're breaking down barriers and empowering ourselves to engage in a conversation that affects us all. The next time you're confronted with a baffling financial product, a jargon-filled sales pitch, or a news headline screaming about the latest market meltdown, remember the emperor's new clothes. Don't be afraid to ask questions, to challenge assumptions, and to demand clarity. Just as the little boy in the fairy tale saw through the emperor's charade, we too have the power to see through the illusions and half-truths that often permeate the world of finance. By arming ourselves with knowledge, asking the right questions, and refusing to be swayed by empty suits and fancy titles, we can make more informed financial decisions for ourselves, our families, and our communities. Remember, the emperor has no clothes, and neither do bad financial decisions. Let's expose the naked truth, embrace financial literacy, and create a more stable and just financial system for everyone.